Critical thinking for me is taking a structured, process-oriented approach to making decisions. It's making decisions based on the evidence at hand, not based on what's happened before. The difference between being like, I solve problems and being like a great problem solver is being comfortable with pain. That sounds awful, but really, like, problem solving is really hard working through things until you get to a state of things working. And solving problems means being wrong most of the time. And it also means having to suffer, and being able to suffer through a problem is oftentimes what's necessary to give you like deep insights into its nature and how to take advantage of it.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search with Candour. I am your host, Jack Chambers Ward, and I am joined by a bit of an SEO legend this week, the one and only Noah Lerner. Noah has been doing amazing work in SEO, in development and building communities over the last 2 decades, and it's a bit of an honour to have Noah on the show, to be honest. He's been on my wish list of guests for a very long time, and I've been very lucky this year to be able to get some of my favourite people, some people who have inspired me in my career and in my SEO journey, to actually join me on the show as guests this year, and Noah is one of those people. I'll be talking with Noah all about critical thinking skills and how important they are to the work we do in SEO, your career, and basically how to solve problems in a better, more efficient way, the right way to approach particular problems and finding solutions in a better and easier way, even with all the AI and all the technology that helps us with so much of the work we're doing at the moment. Noah thinks that the human brain and critical thinking skills are still hugely important, and needless to say, I kind of agree with him. So, like I said, it's going to be a fantastic episode. Stay tuned for my conversation with Noah Lerner all about critical thinking skills after a word from our sponsors. A huge thank you to SE Ranking for sponsoring this week's episode of Search with Candour. SE Ranking is the company behind the powerful and intuitive SEO platform trusted by millions of agencies, businesses, and SEO professionals since 2013. With a robust toolkit, SE Ranking empowers SEO professionals around the world to excel at executing their strategies. Key features include the Rank Tracker, which provides accurate and up-to-date keyword rankings, as well as the competitive and keyword research tools that offer deep insights into market trends and competitor strategies. The platform's AI-powered SEO insights leverage advanced machine learning to deliver actionable recommendations, streamlining the process and letting you outrank your competition. The backlink checker and monitoring tool enables you to analyze backlink profiles and monitor their status, ensuring you've got a very healthy link building strategy. SE Ranking have launched their AI Overviews tracking feature. It's a brand new tool that allows you to track AI search engine snippet that will help you see how you stack up against your competitors in Google's AI enhanced search features. The tool supports you in identifying your rivals in the snippets, analyzing their content, and detecting new opportunities for strategic decisions. Click the link in the video description down below or in the show notes if you're listening to this episode. And a huge thank you to SE Ranking for sponsoring us here at Search with Candour. Optmyzr is the modern PPC management software that is built by PPC people for PPC people. Optmyzr contains everything you need to create, optimize, and automate high-performing paid campaigns across multiple platforms. As I just mentioned, we're going across platforms, and I think this is one of the best time-saving options and features when it comes to Optmyzr. If you are advertising across multiple platforms, including Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook, then you need to be using these cross-platform tools. You can create reports, you can create shareable dashboards, you can share budgets and alerts across all of these platforms. If you are individually managing each of these things, you could save yourself a lot of time by using Optmyzr's cross-platform tools. For monitoring, the alerts let you know when budgets have been exhausted or KPIs have been reached or missed. And when it comes to the rule engine, this allows you to set up custom rules to automate so many time-consuming and manual tasks that are part of your paid campaigns. You can easily automate rules. Basically, if you can write your strategy or tactic down, you can automate it. It's that simple. This can be especially helpful in things like e-commerce when it comes to stopping overspending of a particular ad. This is something I know from personal experience. I have had an ad that has overspent, and if I had used Optmyzr, that would have saved my budget and saved my campaign in that instance, and I wish I'd used Optmyzr at the time. You can also adjust bids and choose which products or ads are showing based on things like the weather and pretty much anything else you can put into a spreadsheet. It is fully customizable and automated, so you can choose when ads start and which products are showing depending on the time of year, depending on the weather, and so many other factors. It's all automated and makes the process so much easier. To sum it up, Optmyzr is the award-winning all-in-one PPC toolkit that makes managing paid search easier, faster, and less prone to error. It puts you back in the control of your campaigns by allowing you to create and deploy your own automations across multiple ad platforms. You can start your 14-day free trial by going to optmyzr.com. That's optmyzr.com. You can also click the link in the show notes. And if you want to see Optmyzr in action, you can book a personalized demo with one of Optmyzr's experts by clicking the link in the show notes as well. So you can get a 14-day trial or book a demo at no cost to you. Like I said, go and click the link in the show notes or the video description down below. And a huge thank you to Optmyzr for sponsoring Search with Candour. Very briefly, before I get to my conversation with Noah, this is a fairly heavily edited episode. I try not to edit this podcast as much as I can, keep the conversation feeling natural and all that kind of stuff, but I did have to edit out some dog barking and some Wi-Fi issues and stuff like that when Noah was recording. So Noah might jump around location. He was recording outside when we did this. So bear with me when Noah jumps around the screen a little bit. Hopefully, audio listeners, you won't notice too much of a disruption. I've kind of fine-tuned the audio to try and balance it out as much as I can. But if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, please do be aware that Noah might relocate a couple of times, and that's because I had to edit around some background noise and things like that. So, yes. Anyway, on to my conversation with Noah Lerner. My guest this week has been building apps, tools, and working on the internet for over 20 years. He has spoken at a variety of conferences, including MozCon, Search Love, Local U, and Whitespark Local Search Summit. He's been a guest on some of my favorite SEO podcasts, including The Recipe for SEO Success, Voices of Search, and Adventures in Local Marketing. He is a director of innovation at Sterling Sky and the founder of the SEO community, which there are over 3,000 members in, including me, by the way, and to some, he is simply known as the Kraken. Welcome to the show, Noah Lerner.
Hey, great intro. That was fun.
Thank you for joining, man. We were just saying before we started recording, I've been following you for a little while. I've been watching your talks, seen you appear on podcasts. I've been a member of the SEO community for a while, and hadn't even occurred to me that you would have time to come and chat with me here on the podcast. So thank you so much for joining me. It's a genuine pleasure to finally sit down and have a conversation with you.
Oh, yeah. Feelings likewise. I've been really enjoying watching your ascent through the community and love watching all the stuff you've been doing on you used to be super active on Twitter. And I've just always enjoyed kind of how you carry yourself.
Thank you, man. Yeah, as has been the case for pretty much every guest I've had on this year, I think, and I'm feeling the same way. Most people are kind of dropping off Twitter right now, and everybody's kind of shifting over to LinkedIn, I think. So, yeah, I was much more active on Twitter, and now I feel like the SEO Twitter has shifted off to a few other platforms. But thankfully, we have the SEO community to all conglomerate and chat SEO things and share knowledge and even discuss podcasts. I know the guests of this podcast will often share their own episodes in the community as well, which is always very cool to see. I know at time of recording, Eric Hoover was just chatting about his episode we did in the community, which is very, very cool. But we're not here to just talk about the SEO community. When I reached out to you, I know you had a couple of ideas about some topics for us to talk about, and one really, really stood out to me. And it seems like a very simple concept at first, but I think it's going to be a pretty interesting and deep conversation that's going to reach in a lot of different directions. And it was critical thinking skills. And I know you've touched on this in previous talks and previous podcasts and things like that, but I kind of want to get into start off, I guess, with kind of a definition of what are critical thinking skills? What is critical thinking?
So keep in mind that all of this comes from someone who has like a really, really, really associative brain, meaning I, by nature, see patterns and connections between things a lot more than I think critically and think in linear fashion. And so for me, learning about critical thinking was learning how to think in a more structured, process oriented way. And I think that gets a little bit to the definition, which is uh, critical thinking for me is taking a structured, process oriented approach to making decisions. It's making decisions based on the evidence at hand, not based on what's happened before. It's an effort to reduce as much as possible bias in the decision making and in an attempt to use logic in order to make decisions. And the process is pretty important. And it starts with what's called first principles thinking, which is kind of trying to figure out like the base level truth upon which you can build a reasoned solution to a problem. And a lot of that is like defining the problem, understanding exactly what it is you're trying to solve. And it's not that you need to take like a super rigorous approach to every single decision, but it has to happen anytime there's something consequential or something that's going to take a long time to execute or something where there's a lot of budget involved. And so, examples of that would have been when I joined Sterling Sky, the agency that I work at now. Um, I was led to I started the job thinking that I wasn't going to be responsible for the GA4 transition. Like, and
In ignorant bliss.
yeah, oh, it was great. I loved it. It was fantastic. But so like in between roles, between two Octobers and Sterling Sky, I had about a month, and I asked in advance, like, "Hey, am I going to be doing GA4 stuff?" Because I was like, "Oh, I'll just take a couple courses, I'll get ready to go." And uh, everything was groovy. I started March 1, I think, or April 1, I don't remember. But um, for a full quarter, I built a Google business profile pipeline because we needed that data for our reporting, we needed that data for strategy, and I was operating in ignorant bliss. We get to June of 2023 with about 1 month before, drop dead transition dates are necessary. Still, everything's all good. With 2 weeks left to go, I get called into a meeting like, "Hey, Noah, we need your help. Like, we're not going to be able to get this going. We thought we were, but like," and so I started to solve. And I think this problem, by the way, is a perfect problem that encapsulates everything that you want to get at. So if it feels like I'm ranting, stay with me because there's a lot of good information here about how problem solving can go very wrong. Ooh, very exciting. Um,
Even dogs are
so,
excited about GA4.
oh, they love GA4. It's the best. Um, but in all seriousness, so with 2 weeks left, without any real experience, real meaning like very deep in the data kind of experience working with GA4, marginal experience with Google Tag Manager, zero experience with any call tracking tools. So we're talking about call rail, call tracking metrics, um, just like any fill in the blank. I had very little experience dealing with like forms, pushing conversion data through Tag Manager to websites, and I did not have a clue as to what the current state of affairs was with all of our accounts. And so I had 2 weeks to get 100 and something clients transitioned from Universal
Oh my
over.
god.
And because I didn't know what I didn't know, because of the extreme time pressures, and because um, the leadership team told me basically how I was going to solve the problem because they had already attempted and they like saw how to get to the goal. So I like let previous attempts color the way that I was going to solve the problem without any deep knowledge of what the problem actually was, and perceiving that I didn't have the time to do the exploration that was necessary in order to get to a solution. And because of that, that problem solving process took 6 months. It wasn't a 2 week problem, it was a 6 month problem. And had I had a background in the different sources, had I had a background in GA4, had I had a background in Tag Manager, I could have reduced it from 3 cycles to 1 to maybe 2 cycles to solve the problem. And it would have been, like a 1 to 3 month problem instead of a 6 month problem. But it was a failure to define the problem up front and a failure to know the full scope of what we were trying to solve, and an inability, and this is sort of like a tenet, right, is like properly define the problem. You need to be able to write out in paragraph format what you're actually trying to solve. Could be bullet points, could be paragraphs, whatever, but you have to have a sense of what's wrong, um, and a hypothesis at least of what's causing that problem, or a hypothesis of how to solve it in order to kind of move forward through the other steps. Seems like a
Yeah,
good pausing point.
definitely. Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Like, so to give some context, I'm not sure if you know this, Noah. I have an astrophysics degree, so I am very logical and very scientific, and all about that kind of scientific process. And that has definitely, I think, stood me well in a lot of the analytical stuff. Like you said, GA4, Universal, working with Search Console, all this kind of stuff. So I really appreciate that kind of boiling it down into these steps and really clearly understanding what the problem is before you try and solve it, because I have been totally guilty of this. And again, maybe this is my ADHD brain kicking in of like, I just want to dive straight to the solution and then worry about like the
Totally.
individual bits, and then like, oh no, I can fix this in 5 minutes and just go straight to some sort of what I think might be the solution, rather than actually, exactly you said, write it down first, whether it's bullet points, whether it's a short paragraph, actually understanding what is the problem, what do my bosses, my managers, the client, whatever it is, what do they want to get from this, what do I want to get from this, how does this, what resources do I have access to, all the basic stuff before you even get stuck in. I totally agree with you, can save a lot of trouble and hassle going down the road when you realize I've got this big plan, but then we don't have resource for it. I've got this great idea, but we don't have access to this thing. It's like, well, yeah, maybe you should have thought about that, like you said, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, 2 weeks ago, whatever it is.
100%. Yeah, like and the different layers of that particular problem. The first layer of the problem was, do we have unified access to all of our websites? Do we have
Seems
unified
straightforward,
access?
right?
Totally. Do we have unified access to Tag Manager? Do we have unified access to all of our call tracking tools? And with 100 and something websites or clients, it was definitely a problem of like, well, we've got this for this person, that for that person, etc. And understanding how all of these different tools push data, whether it was through the measurement protocol, which is basically the GA4 API, a way of pushing data in, or is it going through the tag that sits on the page, and understanding all the implications of that and how the data comes through and how to test it. Oh man, it was like, just to define what is a lead, right? Like for B2B websites, was not uniform depending on how clients measured success. And so like trying to build a flexible reporting solution that was able to capture what is a conversion or a key event for all kinds of different clients with all kinds of different business goals. Man, that problem was just like brutal. So round one was like, hey, do we have access? Solve that big problem. And then it was, um, how do these actual data tools work? Because I wasn't able to get into them at first. And then learning how they all push data and stuff, and executing and executing and executing. It was just probably the hardest problem I've had to solve in digital, or one of. Not It's not like that it was intellectually so hard. It was
Mm.
just that it was combining so many different things, whether it's like people skills and motivating a team of 35 people to align around a goal that you care about, but they might not perceive that they have the time to allocated to solve it. So it was just super interesting. But you touched on something I thought was pretty interesting. You said um, running off to solve the problem without clearly defining what it was. Um, when I joined Two Octobers, I was like really crafty and I was good at solving problems like that. I was known for that a little bit. And I remember getting into my first, not first, but one of the first meetings at Two Octobers, and my boss was brought up a difficult problem, and I went straight to solution mode. And my boss was like, "Whoa, wait, no, this isn't how we do it here." It was like a come to Jesus moment. My boss was like, "Yeah, no, this isn't how we do it." And so we talked about the process, and it all started with defining the problem. And that whole thinking process that I've kind of coined the Two Octobers way because of how we used to solve difficult problems when I was on the member of their team.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of like you said, taking that step back and having that moment. Like I said, I'm totally guilty of this, especially again thinking back to like my science days and doing maths and all that kind of stuff, where it's like I would always get in trouble at school for not showing my working. Because I would just be like,
Yeah,
oh, I blah, 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 done the equation. The answer is 465. There you go, problem solved. They're like, no, no, no.
yeah,
But how did you do that? I'm like, I don't know. I did it in my head, I guess. I kind of like worked through it and whatever. Like, no, show us that you know what you're doing and prove this. And I think that is also weirdly, I don't know how I'm extracting that into my digital marketing career, but I think that's totally relevant for, especially like showing things for clients and people you're reporting to, whether it's like, okay, we started with this tool and then we moved on to this set of data and then imported that into this other thing, and going through that process a little bit more logically and linearly. For me, that then lets you diagnose issues as you go through, right? So you can then be like, so how did you get the data? It's like, oh, it's like 15 different tools. We did it and that was it. Like, no, which ones were they? What data are you talking about? Where is it all coming from? Actually document that stuff as you go so you understand, right, so this is where the problem came in. Why isn't this matching this? There was an issue with the API that didn't pull through or whatever. Like having that little extra definition. And I know it sounds like a lot of work, viewers and listeners, but if you're doing a big project like migrating 100+ sites over from Universal to GA4, that's the kind of thing. We did the same thing here at Candour. Granted, we don't quite have 100. I think it was more like 50 or so for us, but it was still a very long process going through, like you said, all the different conversations with the clients of like, okay, what analytics do we have access to? What do they want to use? Some of them don't want to go to GA4. Some of them wanted to do different stuff. Then what do we have CMX access for everybody? No, we don't. So we need to talk to their developers. It's a whole thing. Having those little moments where you can clearly define potential future pain points without even realizing there might be future pain points, I think has been really useful for me to then be able to refer that back and then, like I said, report that to the people who care, the people you're reporting to, right?
yeah, 100%. I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking about building data pipelines,
Mm.
which is way more complex technically than like solving, hey, do we have GA4 set up, right? But and I was thinking about the architectural diagram for like what that looks like and how many different microservices are involved in order to get data from an API up into Google BigQuery and then visualized into a Looker Studio tool for either reporting purposes or for using it as a tool for analysis. And there are times when things break, and diagnosing it means starting at the end and working your way backwards through however many steps there are to find a solution. And I have found so many times, like in terms of defining first principles, like if I didn't do it, I don't know how I would be able to do super complex problem solving. Like just asking the question, and I talk to myself out loud. I don't know if anyone else does, but like I have found as I've eclipsed 50, I've become way more comfortable, like doing whatever I got to do to like get through the day, right? And one of the things is like, all right, so what do we know? Ask myself that question out loud, and then I just like randomly talk out loud. And there's something about, for me, I don't know if it's for other people too, but like the talking, there's something about the talking and hearing myself say it that it like unlocks further pathways kind of thing. So I hate that I have to talk out loud to other people sometimes because it's like, why do I have to take them on this journey too? But
Yeah,
whatever.
I'm the same way. I feel I have to write something down to really cement it in my brain. Maybe because I like a lot of the communication I'm doing is podcasts and stuff, which is way more like talking out loud and things like that. But sometimes you do just need to verbalize something, write it down, whatever it is, and help that cement it in your brain. I know a lot of people have different learning styles and all that kind of stuff, and I know there's a lot of kind of, again, like if you're reporting to different people, some people might prefer a conversation. Okay, let's book a 30-minute meeting and run me through this whole thing in person. Some people are like, just send me your notes. Like, well, that's all I need is a bunch of bullet points. And it totally depends on the person and how you're doing it. So yeah, I think you're totally right. The way you get to the where you're going doesn't really matter. Maybe don't do it in a coffee shop. Like, Noah, like that would be a bit strange, but I'm sure they wouldn't mind too much. There's weirder stuff happening in coffee shops, right? Than people asking them questions about data out loud.
100%. In terms of like figuring out where you can get your information, like it's writing down the sources and then building connections to those, whether it's opening up the tool and downloading a CSV, or for more robust analysis, maybe you need to get like a data pipeline connection to that information. You then download it one way or another, and then you put it into, I like to put it into BigQuery, even if it's just a Google sheet, because the way that SQL works, which is a computer language, it's super efficient at like going through large data sets, and it's really easy to learn. So like if people are always like, "Hey, what should I learn?" Like SQL should be um, near the top of everybody's list of things to learn if they want to get technical. Um, so then you get your data together. You figure out how you need to join it, like whether you need to join session data with search visits or whatever, and you visualize it in a tool like Google Looker Studio so that you can actually see the connections and the patterns between things. And then as you do it, you're going to write down things that are interesting to you. They're just like insights at this point. And then once you've gathered all your insights, you try and form what's called a hypothesis, which is like a working theory of why something happened or how you can fix it. And then you figure out how you can test that hypothesis. How can I execute a change on a website in order to improve performance? And then you execute the change. And then you track that change to see like what happens over time, and then you draw inferences or make decisions about whether or not your hypothesis worked well based on data versus opinions. And I say all of this stuff super like wide open because just doing this level of process is beyond how most agencies operate. um, it's We're not all data scientists, and we're not going to have that kind of like intellectual rigor in terms of how we approach the work. But I think that having even a couple steps along the way will take you so very far. Um, so you test, you measure results, and then you make decisions about what to do next, what to test next, and you sort of turn the crank on that decision making cycle as fast as you can, because your goal is to make change at speed in order to learn as many lessons as you can in order to drive as much performance as you can. And it's this kind of like approach to test and learn and do things at speed which is what's separating the best practitioners, I think, now from the rest. Um, yeah, we can digest it. We can digest that a little bit
Yeah,
if you want.
definitely. Yeah, there's something you brought up earlier that I think is really interesting when it comes to that analysis of the data side of things in the sort of middle stage there, where it removes the bias of things. And a bias is
Yeah,
something I've talked about on the show a lot recently, whether that's the way we search and just shifting the word good or bad or best or worst or any sort of like positive or negative inference into a query suddenly dramatically shifts the SERP one way or another, and how we are psychologically inherently more negative when we search for things and all this kind of stuff. And I love that kind of, like you said, that data scientist kind of approach. Even if you listeners and viewers are not the most scientific person, just having a couple of those steps and being aware of like how you can remove bias from that process, I think can be a hugely powerful step towards getting, like you said, getting closer to that truth, right? That fundamental principle of like, what is the problem, how we're going to solve it, and what is the data that's going to let us do that. Because I think a lot of SEOs, a lot of agencies, a lot of companies talk about like data driven decisions or data driven marketing and all that kind of stuff. And exactly as you just said, Noah, I think a lot of them kind of don't actually follow the full principles in this way. And they say like, yeah, we make decisions based on data. We'll improve your website based on data. And what that means is they look at analytics or they look at Search Console and graph go up, graph go up. Cool, problem solved. Anyway, next question. And I love your process of going through and kind of repeating stuff and understanding, okay, 3 months down the line, let's revisit that issue and see what happened, see what did improve, what didn't improve. That test, experiment, iteration, improvement kind of process, I think is something a lot of people underestimate in the process. And I know I'm jumping right to the end of the process there, but I think that's something a lot of people kind of take for granted in a lot of ways. Like, yeah, we'll just keep doing the same thing and SEO will do its own work, right?
probably. And people get super confused about information generally. Like, hey, we need to have everything. And to them, everything is the most granular detail of every single data source that they could possibly have access to in order to make a decision. And they think that, more is more. And like, I'm quote unquote a data guy, but I think that the point of information is, do I have enough that's telling me a story to take action? Do I have enough to like ask for more budget? Do I have enough to allocate resources? That's the point. It's not to like sit there and noodle with information. It's to have a question that you need to get an answer to before you sit down, you like define the problem. What is the question we need to get an answer to? And that structures everything else that happens downstream in order to kind of solve for that question or that problem. So yeah, and people generally just don't kind of like take a structured approach, and they also get confused about how important precision is.
Mm.
Is this accurate? Is this not accurate? And I think that totally misses the boat too, because um, like, we're never going to have absolute knowledge. Like, I had a history professor in college who talked about the Buddhist version of truth, and I'm totally mischaracterizing it, but we're going back 30 years. And
We'll let you
what
off.
he said, yeah, thanks, appreciate that. But what Professor Sheck used to always talk about was that truth was a broomstick, and you could like put your hand on the broomstick trying to approach truth, and as you got closer and closer to the end, the broomstick kept getting taller and taller and taller. And so I've always had that in the back of my mind, like, there's a limit to what we can know, and we can never know absolute truth, but we can know enough to do stuff, to take action. And so it's not about like decimal points. It's not about um, did we have exactly 12 conversions or exactly 13 conversions. It's, is there a trend? Is the trend meaningful enough for us to take action? What do we hope to gain out of it if we if we perform this action. And the what do we get out of it, to me, is generally a range, so that we can understand a range of impacts rather than, a forecasted, we're going to sell 12 widgets next year if we do this.
Yeah, 100%. I love what you said earlier as well about the fact that the information and the data we're gathering isn't just numbers and points on a spreadsheet or pulled from analytics or Search Console or whatever third-party tool you're using, whatever it is. It can be conversations with customers. It can be like
Yeah.
testimonials or feedback or whatever it is. That is also information and data that can lead you towards making businesses decisions that make an impact. And something as simple, I did this with a client, I think it was 2 years ago now. We did a customer survey because we were discussing UX and their main like navigation across the top. It was a big like nerdy kind of geek merchandise kind of company that were doing a lot of US traffic and a lot of UK traffic. We're trying to work out like what would benefit the customer. And we just asked them like, how does it feel to navigate this site? What do you think? Do you think the categories make sense? Do you think it is easy to understand where if you click on this thing, does it make sense where you're going to next? And simple things like that. Completely taking the SEO side out of it. Like, do you feel like this cascading navigation is going to benefit blah, blah, blah? Like, ask them like human beings and they will give you feedback like human beings. And that is still hugely valid data that then influenced us to have a discussion and be like, okay, a lot of people are saying they don't like the way these categories are laid out. It would make more sense if this category A was paired with category C rather than category B, because you're more likely to buy those two together. I was like, oh, right. Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, of course. And then that was not from looking at the clicks on analytics or Search Console. That was having real feedback from real people. And I think, like you said, people kind of get stuck in the weeds a little bit and think about, oh, it doesn't have a 10x solution or a particular decimal point or a number associated with it, so it doesn't count as information or data. But combining that, then diving into the actual data and saying like, turns out, you could use like a click tracking piece of software or whatever it is. So like, yeah, turns out people never click category B because it's paired with category A. So maybe we should shift that around. And the human beings behind it, the actual customers, were right. And I find being able to combine that kind of actual human side of things and having the data and the numbers to then maybe they completely disparage each other. Maybe they perfectly correlate. Who knows? But you won't know until you look at it and have those conversations and have those comparisons, right?
100%. I love this. I love when I go on podcasts and I feel like I'm the host because I got the host talking.
You got me interested. You got me passionate, man. Yeah, like I said, this is data and science stuff is my jam as well. So that's exactly
Cool.
what I wanted to talk about this topic. And I'll give another quick story. I know I'm basically taking over the show now, despite you being the guest.
No, man, this is all about you.
There was a funny thing I did with a client a couple of years ago, and I created like a correlation coefficient graph of understanding like how much change A meant for data B or whatever it was. And the client looked at me like, what on earth is going on here? Like, this is some, weird college level science stuff. Like, what are you doing? I was like, well, it actually explains why this thing is happening and why customers are buying product A rather than product B, and how advertising in, platform C then means they buy more of product A. Like, oh, okay, that does make sense. And taking that extra step to correlate two sets of data and understand how they relate to each other. And like I said, it can be customer feedback and completely separate thing like click data. And then putting the two together was like, oh, wow, yeah, that paints a whole different picture to if you just analyzed them separately and kind of took them as two separate things. But because it was all the same site and in theory it's the same group of people who are using the website, then that's a relevant piece of data. And like I said, you can use that data to then, like you said, confirm hypotheses, then test and iterate and make those changes in the future, right? And I think you mentioned trends as well, and I think that's something a lot of people pretty much just think of like the Google Trends side of things, like, oh, how popular is this thing? How much has the search volume changed in this keyword over the last 12 months or whatever? But I think understanding it from a data perspective and how things change and how things relate to each other is a really interesting part of it. When it comes to like market research and audiences and all that kind of stuff, do you think it's a relevant way to kind of go in and take this process and look at it for audience analysis as well, rather than just kind of like we're talking about the more technical side of things, right? Thinking about clicks and all that kind of stuff.
I think it's just having a structured approach to thinking generally, and having a structured way to ask questions. But back to the question of like, is this a reasonable way to like deal with marketing data? The answer is yes, 100% yes. Um, because the alternative is like a spreadsheet of information that you hit the filter across the top, and then you're basically sorting by click volume. Oh, we should go after this. Oh, we should go after that, without any kind of uh, great questions being asked along the lines of, hey, which of these pages or which of these buckets, excuse me, of search terms align with how we think we can actually drive more business impact. It, like people get really, really excited about rank, and they get really, really excited about click volume, or how many times is my website getting clicked, and they're not paying attention to how many widgets did we sell, or how many leads did we get. And we try and focus, the vast majority of our reporting is about hard numbers. It's like, how many leads did we drive last month? How many phone calls? How many form fills? How many chats? And the reason that we like to report that way is it aligns with business goals in a really direct way, rather than being about something that a marketer can game if they wanted to.
Yeah, definitely.
And plays into those biases that a client would have about how my agency's always just trying to take advantage of me.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you can have I don't know, maybe I'm painting with a cruel brush here and a broad brush for a lot of agencies, but you're totally right about if you have access to data that maybe your client doesn't fully understand, or you're treating it like they don't understand it, you're able to then kind of fudge some numbers and get away with a few things of like, oh yeah, look at how much this ranking changed or whatever. But like you said, when it gets to the actual money, actual sales, actual leads of the stuff that, let's be honest, we're all kind of here to do, that is the end goal for vast majority of businesses, is to get leads, to get sales and all that kind of thing. That's really where you get to the juicy stuff. And I'm sure you have done this in your career, Noah. I have done this in my career. You start talking about rankings to a CEO or a person who is not in the marketing team, and they glaze over and they go completely blank, and they couldn't give less of a shit about rankings. Whereas then you start talking about leads and revenue, and their face lights up. They're like, right, now I understand what you're talking about. Okay, the SEO side of things, or your current campaign or whatever it is, has made us this much money and made this many sales. That's a totally valid way, and adjusting that kind of communication for the person you're speaking to and what they care about, I think, is a really important part of that communication process, right?
Oh, 100%. And um, almost worse than what you talked about is a scenario where you inherit a client and their only metric for success is rank.
Oh, nice, nice. I have had not quite that bad, but I did. I took this at a previous agency. I took on a client and removed the ranking like table from the report, and then I was told off by the client in our next reporting call of like, oh no, bring that back. We want to know about the rankings. I'm like, okay, fine. Like, if you really want it in there, that's fine. If you are interested, then that's valid. But yeah, the only report, like, what? How do they? How do you possibly justify an agency spend with just like rankings go up? Yay!
What was interesting was that report was sent around with a weekly cadence to the entire executive leadership team. We're talking
Of
about a
course.
company that does over $10 billion in revenue. So
Whew.
it's not like mom pop hardware store. It's a business with a lot of different
Wow.
services, a lot of different locations, all kinds of stuff. And when we took the client on, it was like, hey, we don't think you should be charting success this way. We think you should be looking at the things that are very directly correlated with success, which are phone calls, which are form fills, which are texts. And it's like, you're tracking these things, right? Uh, no. And they didn't have call tracking turned on.
Oh no.
And this is like my jumping on a soapbox moment, but like, if you work with a business that has any kind of local intent at all, and really any business that's doing stuff on the phone, you really, really, really need to do call tracking. And the way that we do it at Sterling Sky is a lot of our stuff, almost every single engagement or all of our engagements have a very local kind of feel to them. And they generally involve a lot of Google business profile optimization. And we always have um, phone tracking turned on for our Google business profiles, but not just the Google business profile, but two numbers, one associated with traffic that went from GBP through to the website, and then another number for people that called us directly from our Google business profile number. And we've found that to be just critically important to be able to track leads. Same thing with form fills. You need to have a sense of where those users are coming from. Are they coming from ads? Are they coming from organic? How do you think about attribution generally? Is it like a first click? Is it something where you're using Google's algorithm to determine who gets attribution? Is it for us, because it's local, a lot of times we lean into first user actions, like the first time they came to our site, did they come via organic or paid? And this is like, you can totally have this discussion all day long, but for us, we made that decision because it aligns with um, how ads practitioners think about it. And we didn't want to spend all of our days arguing with ad agency people.
No
And
one does.
no one does. I don't want to have a data discussion with an ads person. So like, just aligning around those constraints. And that's another like core tenet of decision making, is like, become aware with your constraints. What are the things that box me into making a decision? And like that Google analytics problem that I described, a lot of it was understanding the constraints within which we operate. Like, there were periods of time where I did not know how data got from tool A to GA4. And I had to learn that because I had to make sure that the not only some data, but the right data got pushed through, because we had to come up with a plan of understanding how we wanted to report on things. And we made a decision as an agency that GA4 would be our source of truth, and that all the other tools had to feed data into GA4. And yeah, so like, understanding the constraints within which you're operating can be hugely impactful, because it's the kind of thing that not only determine prioritization, but they also help you understand where your competitive advantage might be. Because you might be operating in a place where there are constraints that other people won't be able to sort of like work around the edges in the same way, or tweak the constraints in quite the same way as you can. And I'm always like, as a marketer, trying to figure out what the limitations are and what things are hard. And I think about what things are hard because I know that if it's hard for me, it's this isn't humble braggy land. It's just like, if it's hard for me, that means it's really hard, and it's hard for everybody else. And it's like, okay, how much money is tied up in this thing that I'm labeling as difficult? And if I perceive that there's a lot of money tied up in it, then solving for that can mean a big time competitive advantage for us.
Yeah, I
That's
think
just
that
kind of how I've approached things.
absolutely. Yeah, I think I've talked with this with Mark a lot, and that's always been his kind of approach to prioritization. Whether that's coming out from a technical audit, whether that's looking at the prioritization of your own tasks day to day, week to week, month to month, like talking about
Yeah.
career stuff as well, like the impact versus the resources that are required to complete that task is such an initial good step to understand where you need to prioritize. Obviously, then tying in like time constraints, urgency, all that kind of stuff as well. But I
Yeah.
know we talk about that, like I said, with technical audit stuff. This was a conversation I had with Mark when I first joined Candour a few years ago, and it was this like, okay, coming through with this prioritization, give it a score out of 10, essentially, 1 being the easiest, 10 being the most difficult, and then the impact that this technical change will have on the site for the client, give that a score, and then work out how those relate to each other. Is it hugely impactful and very easy to do? Then that should be a priority, right? If you're going to
Oh yeah.
make a lot of money or save a lot of money and it's easy to do, then let's do it. And then, like you said, you eventually get down to those more difficult conversations of, okay, this is going to take a lot of investment from your development team, from our time going through this stuff, whatever it is, but actually the impact is going to be worth it in the long run. Then you can have that conversation. And coming all the way back around to we talked about at the very beginning, that's that data-driven decision, right? You then have the idea of what are the resources, what are we talking about, what's the impact going to be for your site, your client, whatever it is. And I think that's where that sweet spot of understanding and communicating and making a positive impact, I guess, a positive change, right?
A lot of the problems that I end up solving are how do we get to be more efficient as an agency?
Mm.
Um, and it's like, how can we save 50 to 100 hours a month on task A, B, or C? And, like one of the tools that we built was this fun tool to take mobile screenshots of search result pages. And we solve for that problem because our practitioners are taking screenshots all the time. And taking screenshots of mobile search results pages is a pain in the butt when we're all working on a desktop. And so building a tool into Asana so that Asana can become like a Slack bot kind of thing um, was a way that we could chop off a whole bunch of practitioner time. That GA4 project was how do we save an hour per month per client on reporting, right? And it's like, let's get all of this out of the hands of doing anything manual, and let's try and get as much as possible of it into a Looker Studio report.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about with Eric Hoover, I mentioned at the beginning of the show. If you can automate stuff to save yourself time, to, like you said, get turning things essentially into like Slack bots that pull things through automatically, that pull things through to visualizations like Looker Studio, that can save so much time in that process. And I
Yeah.
think, and I will hold my hands up and be totally guilty of this myself. I will often get carried away and be so busy doing the manual stuff when really, if I had stopped, thought about it first, like there's like 3 or 4 things I could totally automate, or like you said, we already have a tool for this that I didn't even think of. But taking that extra step at the beginning and realizing, like, yeah, I don't have to go and manually screenshot through my phone and then send it to myself on Slack to then transfer it over and all this kind of stuff. Something as simple as mobile SERP screenshots sounds like a thing like, you'd have to do that on your phone and have to go through, but actually you can automate that stuff. And I think a lot of technology is making that process easier for us. I'm so proud of us. We've gone nearly an hour without saying the words AI or LLM. I think it's a new record in 2024, I think, on SEO podcasts. But I think a lot of technology is shifting towards that kind of, like you said, especially with agencies where time is literally money. You have to be more efficient, and we can only go so far in our day. You can only work, an 8-hour day or a 9-hour day or whatever it is, and get as much work done as you can. But if you can take away simple time consuming tasks and give them to technology, robots, whatever you want to call it, that can make a huge difference with the efficiency of your work, right? I think that's where a lot of people are seeing that positive impact of a lot of the tools and, dare I say it, AI and LLMs and stuff.
And I am using both of those terms. I mean, I am using AI and I am using LLMs just in terms of the work that I do, like a lot of the technical data pipelining stuff. It's like it's pretty useful to have Claude. I really like Claude Sonnet 3.5. It's a competitor to ChatGPT. It also, the pro plan's like $20 a month. Um, I really like that as a tool for coming up with coding solutions to things. And I've moved from using one tool called VS Code to a clone of it called Cursor
Mm.
to to build things, and it has AI right into the coding environment. Whereas with VS Code, they created something called Copilot. This is awesome. I'm like right
Speaking
underneath
of
an
speaking
airfield
of
today.
co-pilots, yeah,
Yeah, totally.
there's pilots and
Um,
co-pilots all over the place.
but like it, Copilot was amazing to start with because it would basically complete a line. So you'd be typing away and it would auto complete a line or maybe two or three lines. And you could hit the tab button and it would complete a small semblance of code and you'd understand what you were looking at. And then when I started to use ChatGPT, you could basically get it to work with up to about 6,000 words of input, output combined in order to solve a problem, which is the context window, which is large enough to solve a lot of coding problems. And then when Claude Sonnet came out, the context window, i.e., how many words or tokens it could process, went from 8,000 to 200,000, which is shocking because all
Yeah.
of a sudden you could feed an entire code repository into the model so that it would understand the context of everything that you're working on. All sounds amazing, right? Um, the technology is still very, very early adopter-ish in terms of on the coding side. Um, it can get you 80% of the way there, but that last 20% is like such a slog in terms of like dealing with solving difficult things. Um, but I do use ChatGPT to solve problems. You know, turn this into JSON, for example, like to create, take a CSV, paste it into an LLM, and say, "Hey, turn this into new line delimited JSON." Blammo, it's done. It'll output the code. Or help me create regex for Looker Studio. Help me create regex for Google Sheets. Create a Google Sheets function that will do blah, blah, blah. Taking a picture of something that's broken, pasting that into the model, and then it's saying, it looks like you're trying to blah, 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 blah. Or building an application and pasting all the error messages directly in. And it's like, oh, you need to add this package or you need to do this or that. And those are like the hits, like when it gets it right. But like a lot of the time it's like coding with a drunk 13-year-old, like really. I mean, it's like, hey, so you want me to go over here? Okay, I'm going over there. It's like, no, man, guardrails, stay here, focus on this. Oh, over there. Okay, I'll be right back. It's like unbelievable. And the longer the context window or the more stuff you feed it, the more confused it gets and hallucinates because it doesn't understand exactly the problem that it's trying to solve. And people always make fun of AI like it's like the technology is not there, it's no good, blah blah blah. The more I work with it, the more I feel like it mirrors how humans think. Like, you know, you get it to reason or explain why it's doing things the way that it's doing, and it becomes pretty interesting to me, like how it thinks through things. Like working through LLMs, like some of the lessons I learned about how to get it to be more efficient is like just like this critical thinking process that we're talking about. is you start super high level, you explain the core problem you're trying to solve. You then, and this is what most people don't do, you get it to tell you back what you want to solve with it. And then when it explains the goals to you, you're going to quickly understand if it understands what you're trying to do or not. And if it doesn't, you have to iteratively work through this. And then you get it to keep going and going, and you ask it questions and get it to answer so that you're aligned around the goals. It's like, great, cool, we're aligned around the goals. And then if you're building software or something, it's like, all right, well, show me the architecture that's necessary to accomplish those high level goals. It'll then, or explain what an architecture looks like, and it'll talk through it. And then you'll quickly understand, does it understand the problem or not? Iteratively work through it, clarify the architecture. And then once you're aligned around that, then you start to get more and more granular. All right, let's work on function or step one. Please explain to me in pseudo code. That's like, fake code. Where it's basically like the natural language way of explaining how a function would work. Using pseudocode, explain to me how step one would get executed. It talks, you're paying attention. Does this make sense? Does it align with how I think the problem should be solved? Does it seem like it understands what I'm trying to do? Yes or no? Yes, it understands. All right, please create the code in node.js, which is like a version of JavaScript that will actually accomplish that goal. And it creates the code. That was yes, it understands. No, it doesn't understand. Iteratively work through it again and again until you're aligned on what it's trying to do. Then once you get to yes, then you get it to create the code. And now, congratulations, you're 70% of the way there. And the last 30% takes 90% of the time.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people want that kind of single click solution with a lot of the LLM and AI side of things. So they're like, oh yeah, sure. You want to, like you said, chuck a problem at ChatGPT and then get a solution. And exactly as we're saying, again, right at the very, very beginning of the show, you leap straight to solution and you don't actually think of it. You don't go through that process. And I have totally found this, and I'm not quite on the coding side of things, but especially with sheets and Excel and all that kind of stuff, my formula knowledge is like probably like a 4 out of 10. I know some things that will impress my parents, but not anything that will impress anyone who knows what they're actually talking about. And I was like, okay, I want to do this thing. And one of the account managers here at Candour was like, I've got this sheet and I need to extract these numbers that are all in the same cell and add them up individually at the end into different cells at the end. I was like, God, is that possible? And I was like Googling away, trying to work out what's going on. I was like, hold on a minute. I'll ask. I think I used Gemini as an example of like, I asked Gemini and went through that process. And exactly as you said, it chucked something out straight away. And it's like, that's very confident. Okay, I'll give that a go.
Yeah, very confident.
It's like, yeah, it just had an answer in like 2 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that must be right. It answered so quickly. It must be correct. Tried it, didn't work. I was like, okay, right. And we went through exactly the process you were saying there, Noah, of like, okay, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? And I love the way you described like understanding if it understands what the problem is such a thing that I think, and again, I'm learning here as well, that process of like, you assume the computer knows how the thing works, right? Because technology is clever, and coding is a computer thing, so the computer would understand the computer thing.
Like
right?
Gemini should understand Google Cloud. Both Google products. Yeah, not so much.
That's a whole other conversation, but yes. Yeah, exactly. You assume that everything is kind of work and technology is just going to work. But yeah, I really, really love the way you put it of like, does the thing actually understand what it's doing and what the problem is and what the solution it's providing? Because exactly as you said, they're totally guilty of just going off in a different direction. Even the same thing with like content creation and stuff. I know, again, I had said this in my conversation with Eric a few weeks ago, where it was that no matter what you ask it to do, I again used Gemini as an example of summarize this movie plot in 10 bullet points. And it gives you 10 bullet points. And then at the end, it goes, and this movie is particularly good because it was directed by Martin Scorsese and is considered a great. It's like, it didn't ask for that. I don't need extra waffle at the bottom there. I asked for 10 bullet points. I don't need a little extra like faux review at the bottom. I don't need that extra stuff. Just give me 10 bullet points. And like you said, adding restrictions, adding limitations, and understanding how they'll actually benefit you in the long run is a huge part of using those kind of technologies. And I think that's really, really helpful.
Well, the through line of all this critical thinking stuff is trying to really make sure that you understand the full contours of a problem in order to get to a solution for it efficiently. And the problem, there are pros and cons to anything, but especially with AI in problem solving, because you're like throwing a problem in there and it gives you an answer back, teaches you nothing.
Yeah.
And that to me is like a canary in the coal mine of people getting dumb. And not like there's 17 million different canaries in the coal mine that sort of say that same message, but it's like I believe that you need to get, elbow deep into a problem to understand all the component parts of it. And the problem with AI is that it'll just give you a solution without really teaching you how to fish, how to catch that fish. But like that working through the problem and it breaking again and again and again and again and again does help you understand the contours of the problem. And it does give you the background information and context to be able to solve for it in the future. And that would be like a takeaway that I would share with people. Like the difference between being like I solve problems and being like a great problem solver is being comfortable with pain. That sounds awful, but like really, like problem solving is really really hard, and the innovation work that I do, like mostly things are broken until they're not anymore. And a lot of it is like being okay with that and working through things until you get to a state of things working. And solving problems means being wrong most of the time. And it also means like having to suffer, and being able to suffer through a problem is oftentimes what's necessary to give you like deep insights into its nature and how to take advantage of it. And very few people are willing to do that. And that willingness to like really dig into a problem and to hand, to inspect that data by hand, like what you were describing before, like I feel like there's value there. A lot of people will say like no, but like one of the first things that I'll do sometimes if I'm working in a vertical that I've no experience in is I'll download a website's all of their search data. Let's say they have some search history. I'll download all of their queries and I will alphabetize them and I will look through the list because I don't know what modifiers are going to be used. I don't know if it's best, worst, top, whatever. I don't know how they're going to describe it. I don't know how they're going to talk about price or what price points are going to matter for different things in that vertical. Like, let's say we're talking about bicycles, that is. I didn't know that I would see best bike below $2,000, best bike below $1,000, like what those price points would be. Um, by looking through the data, you learn all kinds of stuff. Like, are does this website always get like short head termy searches, or like I had a client that had like their website had a testing component to it, and so what that meant was that they had many, many, many search terms that were over 300 words long,
Wow.
and you're like, what? And the what was they would take like some advanced career test question from some online test they were taking somewhere else, copy it, paste it into the search
Mm.
uh, and then end up on that website because that website had an answer to that kind of question. And like those types of things, like I learned that because I was building a process to create engrams for a website. And the engrams are just basically you take all the search terms and you split them up into individual words, and then you get rid of things called stop words. Like the is an example of a stop word where it doesn't really give meaning or context to the words being searched. So you get rid of all the all the stop words and stuff, and then you're left with an array of words. Well, when you're trying to come up with engrams and you're working with search terms that might be 300 words long, then you have enormous arrays of different ways that those words could all be combined in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 word combinations. And most functions that are designed to work with those are going to break down. And had I not looked at the search data, manually inspected it to see like, oh, there's something weird here. Like I've never seen this as a problem before because I've never dealt with a website that had 300 word search terms, you know? So hope
Amazing.
that's
Yeah,
helpful or interesting.
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's like you said. I think that through line through all of this is the perfect way to wrap us up. Whether we're talking about digging into the data, and I guess the lesson is if you want to learn, you got to suffer, right? Noah, that's the
100%.
lesson we want
Yeah.
everyone to take away.
No, I mean, my takeaways in all seriousness are you have to be comfortable with the pain and you have to really dig into problems. You need to have a process to solve them. And then outside of all of the stuff that we've discussed, you have to have a community of people who care about you. And you have to actively grow your network of people who you pay a lot of attention to, who you go out of your way to help as much as possible. Because if you're ever in a time of need, those people will come running to help. And we're living through turbulent times, in our industry. And whatever help any single one of us can have is going to totally help us um, in a turbulent future. So, like, that's why I put so much energy into the SEO community because I know that everybody needs other people. And I want people to have a place to gather, and I want them to have a place where they can build friendships and kind of build that network of people who care about them. Whether it's, I like to think of it as like a board of advisors, people who help each other in their career.
Yeah,
Those are
100%. Like
those would be my takeaways.
they're real takeaways. We'll talk about the
Yeah,
suffering another time, but yeah, those are the real
yeah,
takeaways. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, I really, really appreciate your insights and spending an hour with me here chatting all things critical thinking, data analysis, community, and everything else in between. Where could
dogs,
people
airplanes.
and plenty of dogs, co-pilots, and airplanes as well along the way. Where
Yeah,
can people follow you? Follow Sterling Sky. Join the SEO community. Where's the best place to find you across the various places on the internet?
yeah, totally. Let's see. I am still on Twitter. My handle is my name, Noah Lerner. LinkedIn is actually been like really growing for me as a platform in terms of like what I pay attention to. And then the primary place where I hang out is the SEO community. And that does have a website. It's theseocommunity.com. And to become a member, you just go to theseocommunity.com/apply. I think you have to do .html after. Um, and then outside of that, I also do these things on an application called Clubhouse, and that's every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, which is tough for folks in Europe. But that's been super robust. We get like 20 to 30 people in the rooms every Tuesday, and it's audio only, and it's been something that we started in 2021, and it's been every it was almost every day up until 2023 maybe, and then we shifted to like once a week.
Amazing. Like I said, I am a member of the SEO community, so I'm not just kissing ass here. It is one of my favorite communities I'm a part of, and I think it has been really, really awesome to meet new people, make new friends, all that kind of stuff. So, listeners, if you are interested, please do go and check out, go and follow Lerner, go and follow Sterling Sky. go and follow Noah and everything cool things that he's doing across
Yeah,
LinkedIn, SEO community.
Sterling Sky is absolutely amazing. If anybody is got experience in local and they're looking for a great next step in their career, we're growing and are amazing.
Well, there you go, folks. I'll put links for everything in the show notes if you want to go and check out Sterling Sky, follow Noah, join the SEO community. Everything will be linked down below. And to wrap things up, thank you once again, Noah. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
And that wraps up this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching or listening, wherever you're watching or listening. Please do like and subscribe on YouTube. We've just crossed 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is very, very exciting. Thank you to all of you who have joined us along the journey and subscribed throughout the year. We are also pushing forward towards 5 stars on Spotify. I think we're like 4.8, 4.9 at the moment, which is very, very exciting. So please do give us a 5-star review on Spotify if you haven't already, if you're listening or watching on Spotify. Huge thanks to Noah Lerner for joining me. I mean, what a pleasure, what an honor to have Noah sit down with me for an hour and have a really interesting conversation about his career, his journey, and his thoughts behind how to solve SEO problems and bring critical thinking skills more to the forefront, which I think, to say the least, in today's climate, I think critical thinking and skepticism is more important than ever. Never be afraid to ask questions. Never be afraid to stay curious and be curious about anything you see around you, because I think that's an important part of life, an important part of SEO and our careers in general. Anyway, I'm waffling on. I appreciate if you're still listening to this outro, you are one of the actual hardcore listeners and viewers. If you watch right until the end, or if you listen right until the end, I will have some amazing conversations coming up over the next few weeks. Of course, Mark and I will be back here in the studio in a couple of weeks to talk about all the latest SEO news and all that good stuff throughout November. I'm back with Marco Giordano. We're going to be talking all about web data and how to communicate important points of web data to your clients. And Mark and I dive into a bit of BigQuery as well, because Marco is a genius when it comes to that kind of stuff. I'll also be talking with Amanda King, talking all about content hierarchy and content consolidation, how you should be building your content structures and fine-tuning and optimizing them now in 2024 and going into 2025. And I've also got Tomek Rudzki joining me all about AI overviews. I know, we've covered AI overviews a couple of times, but Tomek knows a lot more about AI overviews than most people, because he built ZipTie Dev, which is a tool that allows you to track, and hopefully by the time you hear this, or by the time you hear our conversation in a couple of weeks, to optimize for AI overviews as well. So diving into the technicalities and the specificities of how to track and where we think AI overviews are going, I think it was a really interesting conversation with Tomek Rudzki. And like I said, that'll be out in a couple of weeks as well. So like I said, amazing guests throughout the rest of November. We're heading towards the end of the year. I'll be doing a big kind of end of year predictions and a big recap and all that kind of stuff. And we kind of do our own little version of Spotify Wrapped when it comes to the podcast as well. So stay tuned for all of that over the next few weeks before the end of 2024. Of course, I'll be here every week. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Have a lovely week.